All right, thank you so much for staying with us. Now, in what many people consider a landmark move, President Tinubu signed into law 4 sweeping tax reform bills that aim to modernize the way taxes are collected, administered, and utilized in Nigeria. Utilized, underscore that. Now, these laws represent a bold attempt to streamline Nigeria's complex tax systems, improve fairness, and unlock the revenue potential of Africa's largest economy. For instance, the Nigerian Tax Act consolidates over 50 small overlapping taxes into a single simplified framework. I mean, we spoke about that quite a number of times on this program. The Tax Administration Act is the second one. It ensures uniform tax rules across federal, state, and local governments, and reducing the administrative conflicts that have plagued the system for decades. The Nigeria Revenue Service, the Nigeria Revenue Service Act, replaces the FIRS Act with a more autonomous body, and the Joint Revenue Board Act brings a new level of coordination and fairness to tax administration with a tax ombudsman and a tax appeal tribunal for dispute resolution. So let's break down today the pros, cons, opportunities, and challenges of this tax overhaul and ask the big question: will these reforms truly transform Nigeria's tax landscape, or will they, as usual, fall short of expectations? 2 gentlemen join us this morning. Dr. Olugbenga Adeoye is a chartered accountant and public affairs analyst. He joins us here. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Pleasure to
as well as Mr. Babatunde Olani, is associate director, PwC Nigeria. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you for having me.
Those days are now finally gone. I saw that video back in time. Somebody, a truck driver, was flipping pages up to 80-something taxes or levies and all that he had to pay from one state to the other until he got to Lagos. How gladdening, how comfortable does that make you feel, or not?
Oh, good. And if you look at, you know, in this new Tax Act now, no more bills. You have to Establishment Act. And so we are not going to bother too much about that, you know, creation of the Nigerian Revenue Services. We don't want to call it tax. Federal Inland Revenue Services is now Nigeria, belongs to all of us.
What's the difference in that, by the way?
So the difference is that that agency in the past presupposes an agency belonging to the federal government of Nigeria. But in actual fact, it's an agency belonging to
the federation,
the entire federation. So the Nigerian Revenue Services is now seen as belonging to all of us. Now you had the Joint Tax Board. Everything around this is about tax, but now we are saying Joint Revenue Board. Now the tax administration, as good as it is, we have issues to deal with, which is states having to repeal certain laws. So if you look at when this act was in bill form, Section 197 of it repealed about 11 tax laws. In other words, most of the amended acts in 2004 were repealed. And so you now have what we call the Nigerian Tax Act. In the past, you have pieces of legislation, value-added tax somewhere, petroleum profit tax somewhere, capital gain tax somewhere. Now, what this does to the country is ease of doing business, attraction of foreign direct investment. So when you get into Nigeria, you pick the Nigerian Tax Act. It gives you an idea of what is expected of you. But coming back to the poor, you know, you then need state government and local government to follow suit. Yes, the rates and the rules will come into effect on 1st January 2026, but implementation must start now. For example, ZAC need to call for tender now to change the logo, to change you know, the name from FIRS. It's not on 1st January that you start awarding contract. Letterheads need to change. The Joint Tax Board, as we had it before, they need to start changing now because it's been signed. Now, when you now look at the beauty of this tax, you know, Nigeria Tax Act, is that it is actually pro-poor, to be honest with you. And then it's also pro-growth. Take, for instance, in the past...
We'll break it down. My apologies. We'll break it down a bit. Let me just take the opening comments of Mr. Olani as well on this issue. Well, you guys must be really proud. It's one of you that, that led the charge.
Absolutely.
You know, and of course, I know that he himself has been at the forefront for many years, Mr. Idele himself.
Over 2 decades.
Over 2 decades, you know, talking about that. The same way Professor Oke has been talking about electricity arrangements in Nigeria, you know, talking about it for almost 2 decades as well. So, well, we'll celebrate with the House later, but how much of his advocacy would you say have been inserted into this new initiative of the federal government?
I would say a lot of it, but also I would say it's the advocacy of Nigerians, right? Because it's an exciting time for Nigeria, and I think tax is top of mind, even globally, right? Look at the US with the big, beautiful bill, right? And also things that the OECD are doing. Kenya just signed in their finance bill into a law just this week, right? So you look at also the makeup of the presidential committee as well, right, which was made up of over 100 Nigerians representing the private sector, public sector, and also students as well, who are the future of Nigerians. So I would say a lot of those advocacy points made his way not only for himself but also for Nigerians, and a big one of it is looking at the fiscal environment, right? You know, there was a time in recent years where for every 1 naira the Nigerian government earned as revenue, it was paying 99%, right, to service debt, right? And that means that from a sustainability standpoint, right, the fiscal government had to do something drastic, right? So the tax laws pretty much complement some of the structural economic reforms that this administration is pulling together, right?
Okay. Now, before the bills were finally passed by the National Assembly, both chambers, there was so much furore, so much uproar. And of course, everyone has, you know, perhaps clearly come to the same round table now. There is little, if any, voice or opposing voice to it. The issues that were raised then, particularly by governors, do you think those issues are permanently settled? I'm asking that question against the backdrop of whether or not we can significantly or we are engaging Nigerians in the process of implementing these laws. Because it's one thing to have laws, it's another thing altogether for those laws to be obeyed by the people.
Absolutely, and I think you rightly touched on it. One important thing I must say is the tax laws bring close to 200 fundamental changes, but it's just less than 5, right, that dominated the news space and caused all this controversy, right? So that placed the burden on the committee to effectively communicate, right? And if you
so their job is not done?
Their job is not done, absolutely, right? This is actually where the job begins, right? Because it's one thing to have good policy. Nigerians have good ideas, we have laws, right? But the anchor point is implementation, right? And just as Dr. Deye said, right, implementation starts from now. Even though the date is 1st of January, there are action steps that the public sector, right, the key actors, the Nigerian Revenue Service, the Joint Revenue Board, the tax ombuds that we didn't have before that we need to set up now, right? And also some of the frameworks and structures that have been put in place in the law to ensure collaboration among the intergovernment agencies from the Nigerian Revenue Service at the federal level and also the state revenue services as well, and also at the local government level. There is that collaboration that extra in the law that we need to implement, just so we see the benefits that are anticipated in the laws.
Before you talk on the details, Dr. Deye, I'd like you to speak to the communication of these initiatives. I was speaking with a retired federal civil servants. And part of our conversation went to the line of the fact that most of the time when government comes up with tremendous and amazing initiatives and they budget for everything else, they don't budget for communication. And communication is not just, information is not communication. Giving out information to people piecemeal does not mean that you have communicated, does not mean that people have understood and accepted, you know, and owned the process. So how do you see this happening? He said the committee's job is not done and 100 of them must communicate to 200 million Nigerians.
Oh, I agree with you. I'll give you a practical example. A few weeks ago, I was in Abuja, and I worked so much, I became so tired. And a friend called me, I said, I need to sleep for an hour. Nobody can see me, nobody can talk to me. Then I went to sleep for 1 hour. Then when I woke up, I missed 35 calls, including that of my wife, my children. People have called me. And then my wife started calling people in Abuja. Did you hear from him? Where is he? I need to get across to him. And then I realized it was after then that a friend of mine said, oh, he told us he needed to sleep for an hour. So I left my telephone in the office. Now, the mistake I made was that I did not pass that detail to the house to let them know, please don't bother me the next 1 hour. That's the power of communication. Now, if you have done that, the stress of having to call this to ask questions will not arise. Now, if you look at communication, the issues you raise about people not being happy, you see, what people were not happy with is just derivation. And I can tell you, when you start reading law, we were told that law is dynamic. Law grows with the growth in the society. See, this law that has been passed now is going to change. I give it 5 years because the derivation that we recommended was 60%. The Governors Forum met and said, no, 30% is okay. And then equality, 50%. What is going to happen in Nigeria is that the communication that the committee is doing now and the implementation committee will do, the Governors Forum, they will be the one to help us to do it. In that they will now see the benefits they get from that 30%. And then they will begin to team up together, improve your state, ensure that there is a generation, there is consumption, you improve security in your state, and then you see what is in it for you. And then by the time you have 18 or 19 out of the 36 states coming together to say, guys in the National Assembly, can you help us do something about this derivation so that he can go to what Taiwo Yedele Committee presented before? And I can tell you, it helps you to work so hard at the state level, improving security, making sure you have a push strategy for investment to come in. And then you get something in attribution. Apart from that, the communication that needs to go to the public also is that state governments are now getting more value-added tax. Before, it used to be 50% of total generation. Federal government has given away 5% out of their own. And the reason for that is for state government to repeal all of the nonsense tax laws. And we need to communicate this to the people. We need not wait till January 1st before the speaker of the respective state assemblies will begin to pass law to repeal consumption tax, because it's double taxation when you compare to VAT. As I speak, there are state governments that are still sending forms around to people in restaurants and hotels to come and pay consumption tax. And this is part of what this act is addressing. And so this communication is very key. We need to go around the country, talk to members of the National Assembly. In fact, the state assembly in respective states, they cannot go on recess now till December, except for Christmas, because they need to begin to repeal all of the nonsense tax laws and then aligning it with what we have in the Nigerian Tax Act now. Now, if you now look at it, communication to the people, the citizen, who feels, oh, what is federal government? I heard you talking about electricity generation. Part of what this tax act is doing now is that solar materials, energy, generation, Genco, and the rest, they are now exempted from value-added tax. So which means you cannot arbitrarily just increase your rate on account of the taxes you are paying on the generation. So, which is a good thing for the people.
But, you know, the challenge of foreign exchange is still quite significant.
Well, foreign exchange is coming as a result of demand. And when demand is higher than the supply, then you're going to have increase in the price of anything. So as it applies to commodities, it applies to currency too. But when we begin to improve in our production, the MSME improving, people with up to 50 million being exempted from taxes, you see guys coming into the country setting up businesses, and then they don't have to worry about paying taxes. Okay. So you concentrate your energy on the growth of your business. Look at PAYE, for example. In the past, if the tax authority at the state level look at your income, and after granting you consolidated allowance of 20% and 200,000, if they look at the basket and they find 300,000, they charge you 7%. If they peep again and see another 300,000, they charge you 11%. If they peep again and see 500,000, they charge you 15%. If they look again and see 500,000, they charge you 19%. Above 1.6, 21%. Anything above 3.2, 24%. Now, guess what? The new tax law says, after granting consolidated allowance, if we peep and we saw 800,000, your tax rate is 0. 0. Now, if we now see 2.2, something above 800, up to 2.2, 15%.
You are already starting the communication part, which is good. Okay. I'll come back to you. You raised an issue about pro-poor the other time. Yes. I'd like you to discuss that. But let me ask you, Mr. Lani, particularly how these issues concern businesses, both large scale and small scale. The president has always been pro investment. Of course, he's a businessman himself, you know, having issues. So what are the benefits for small businesses? And what are the risks they run if they don't know what these laws say on their behalf?
Thank you very much for the question. I think the tax laws do fantastic well for small businesses, right? The first one is, which he started to touch on, right, is the expansion of what it means to be a small business, right? So before the tax laws were enacted, the definition of a small business were businesses that had revenues of 25 billion and below, right? So what that meant is that if you had a business that had revenue of above 25 million, but below 100 million, you were still paying taxes of a combined 23%. So companies' income tax at 20% and tertiary education tax at 3%. Now, if we look at the expanded definition of small businesses, right, which could go at as high as 100 million, right? On the harmonized version of the bills, the revenue threshold was 100 million. So if you have revenue, a small business today that is earning revenue of, say, 100 million, you pay no tax. Previously, you would have been paying taxes at 23%. So that's the first thing that this tax law does favorably for small businesses. Now, the second aspect of it is that it exempts them from VAT compliance. So there's some administrative compliance costs that comes when doing businesses as a small, previously medium business, now a small business that you don't have to do any longer, right? You don't need to file monthly returns, and you also need to, in certain situations, file your income tax returns without an audited financial statement. So the laws relaxes your compliance burden, right? So not only are you reducing paying no tax from an income tax standpoint, your cost of compliance within the business, your ease of doing business, right, also drastically reduces. Now, the second aspect of it is that it gives a favorable tax environment for individuals which form a big part of the workforce, right? By ensuring that a huge part of their incomes are exempted from tax, right? So that kind of ensures that Nigerians have more disposable income to buy goods.
I'm just looking forward to the communication plan for people to know all these things.
And that's something that the committee also has, and we have a role to play. You have a role to play as the media, and we know that they're also looking to collaborate with the Ministry of Information, Nigerian Orientation Agency, right, to kind of communicate these things to Nigerians. And there are plans as well to convert these laws, right, into Pidgin English, Yoruba, Igbo, Hausas, right, so that Nigerians can better understand, right, their obligations. And the tax authorities, the Nigerian Revenue Service, and also the various state tax authorities also have a big role to play in terms of their taxpayer education initiatives, which is paramount in this new phase. And the risk that they face, right, is losing some of these benefits. And one last point I wanted to make is around the investment, right? Because one of the things, if you look at the uncertainty around passing the PIB, that took over 20 years. Right now, the passage of the PIB into PIA has facilitated investment in the oil and gas sector. We've seen a lot of transition over the last few years from Mobil to Shell, right, and also to ENI. But we're seeing that the passing of this tax laws within 2 years provides fiscal certainty. No investor will want to come in and invest in a scenario where the fiscal space is unstable, right? So the signing of these bills into law provides that certainty that investors need, right, to bring their investments into Nigeria. I saw in your program earlier that FDI fell by 19% Q1 2025, right? And these tax laws provide the runway, as the IMF said, right, for these investments to come in and hopefully translate to positive economic growth for Nigeria.
No, Dr. Adeoye, before I'll come back to you on the tax ombudsman, issue shortly. Absolutely. You were talking about the pro-poor. What is it that people need to know, particularly about, so that when they receive their pay slips and they analyze and they see there are some things, that are supposed to happen that have not happened, they will know to take it up with their organizations?
Okay. For example, you have organizations need to be trained. You need to train human resource staff. You need to train the accountant in every organization, because one thing about people is that they want to continue with what they used to do in the past. And so, without the tax authority collecting additional taxes from people that are exempted, the workforce within can actually be cheating them by taking taxes that ought not to be taken. And so, if your salary in a year is maybe in a month you are earning a little above 100,000 naira, you are not going to pay any tax. You need to take note of that. So people that are in the category of minimum wage, 70,000, 80,000, 100,000, they're not going to pay tax anymore with this new tax law. And the good thing
But does that also affect a private sector?
Yes, everybody. Private sector. Whether you're working in private companies, you're working with government, anywhere. And you know what is funny? State government can be funny. They may be deducting these taxes from people that are not aware. I know that will not happen in my state. Too many learned people in my state, they won't do that in Ogun State. So if after taking, and this thing is very simple to calculate, the new law says after taking your consolidated allowance and what you have left is 800,000. Don't forget, you have 20% plus 200,000 in the consolidated allowance, 0%. If you have above that, up to 2.2 million, 15%. Next 9 million, 18%.
Of your salary?
Yes, what is left per annum.
It is what you will pay
as tax.
As tax.
If you have next 13 million, 21%. Next 25 million, 23%. If what is left is above 50 million, you pay 25%. Of course, my argument over the years, when we were trying to give input into the Finance Act in the past, is when we came up with 25 million as threshold of small companies then was that, what are we going to do to MSTO, the Federal Inland Revenue Offices that are dealing with small companies? I personally feel that we'll still need to go the route of progressive taxes, such that we will build the culture of compliance in people. Because some people will say, well, since the new law says if I don't earn above, say, 50 million, I'm not going to pay tax. Then you now see that company not earning above that threshold for the next 10, 20 years. So the Nigerian Revenue Service need to deploy technology to catch people using their BVN to see where they are keeping the money. But I personally believe over time, we're still going to review this, to say that, okay, if what you are earning is this small, you still pay tax, you still pay your VAT, but you know your compliance is minimal. And what you pay in real sense, in value, is lower than those big companies. Of course, when I raised this argument, our colleagues said, well, why this is coming is because more than 80% of the total tax revenue is actually coming from the big company. You know, less than 20%, and that is confirming the Pareto principles. So let's not bother about these small entities, because the entire taxes coming from them is insignificant, and so let's allow them to grow. But personal income tax, people should take their destiny into their hands and be watching your pay slip. Say, how did you arrive at this?
I'll be close to the accountant's office.
Exactly.
Okay. Mr. Ladi, this one is for you, and it's coming from Tola. It says, if you factor the devaluation of the currency and the 100 million naira definition of SMEs that has changed from the previous rate, your revenue has gone up, but your unit sales hasn't. His question, ain't we giving with one hand and taking from the other?
So I think, and thank you very much for the question, I think to a large extent, we need to acknowledge progress when we see one, right? If it's 100 million passes through in the signed version, we've not seen that. Hopefully you see it in the coming week. Well, that means that the exemption threshold has increased 400 times, right? 400%. So in that respect, there is that exemption extended to a lot more businesses than it was previously, right? So those businesses will enjoy exemptions. Now, the other changes that complement the income tax is also what they've done from a VAT standpoint, right? So one good thing that's come true, but the sustainability will still need to confirm over time, is the fact that the VAT rate didn't increase. So what that means is that currently the consumptions that these businesses suffer as a result of doing their businesses would not increase from a cost standpoint. And I think the other one as well is when it comes to the ease of paying taxes, right? So there's a lot that the Nigerian Revenue Service is going to do when it comes to digitizing, should I say, the tax administration system, how companies file returns, how companies pay their taxes. That will be a lot more simplified. One of the things I used to say is if a company is doing businesses across the 36 states and the FCT, they have to engage with different tax authorities, right? And this is a very complex thing to do, right? But the Tax Administration Act now provides a framework whereby there's a lot more collaboration, there's a lot more data integration among these authorities, and a lot more efficiency within the system. And hopefully that translates into a better ease of doing business, right? One of the things that the law also provides is having joint audits. So instead of having an audit with Lagos State Tax Authority, Ogun State Tax Authority, Borno Tax Authority, and also the Nigerian Revenue Service, there is a framework now whereby they can just come and do one audit. One of the things we see in practice is as one tax authority is coming to do audit, another one is just waiting at the gate, right? So once that one is done, the next person comes in. There isn't time for businesses to actually face their profit-generating activity, right? But hopefully with this, we see it translating to more positive economic activity for Nigeria.
Okay. Well, this one is from Pastor Law Alpha Cross. I don't know if your proposal for the what I can call the FBI initiative of monitoring the bank accounts will answer this question, but Pastor Law Alpha Cross is asking. Mr. Edele has repeatedly said the new tax law is targeted at the well-to-do in the economy. And unfortunately, the rich is used to evading taxes with impunity. It requires adequate creation of awareness towards patriotism and conscience. I know you see the question.
I 100% agree with that pastor. And to be honest with you, the problem we have in Nigeria when it comes to tax compliance is not for the poor, because they are subjected to these taxes whether they like it or not. You know, 30,000, they take the tax from you. 50,000, they just take it. Especially civil servants. You need to go and check the taxes that bank workers are paying. It will amaze you. I have a friend, he was showing me his tax per annum, about 2.5 million. I have people paying 750,000 in a month because they are working somewhere. And then you now see a big man who has a G-Wagon, who has a Range Rover, whose house is in Banana Island, and you need to ask them for their tax clearance. And this is where patriotism and fairness comes to play. Now, the youth are going to be benefiting because one of the provisions in this tax law now is that you're going to have youth working from home. You don't have to cluster together in one office. So they are going to engage people that will be doing data mining. And so they need to manage this well. So we don't want a situation where we look at Ayo now, or we look at Niyi and say, Niyi, you know, like Taiwo was saying 2 days ago, we are not going to even ask you to tell us how much you have earned. We are just going to tell you, this is your income, and this is the taxes you should pay. I know people, they have G-Wagon, they have Range Rover, they have Rolls Royce, and they are not paying as much tax as I'm paying. Isn't that very ridiculous? Maybe not paying as much as you are paying. And so the governors of the various states and the chairmen of tax authorities must be people who are pro-poor, but they must pursue the rich to pay their taxes. So you cannot, if you tell me you don't have this income, no problem. We use your lifestyle to determine your revenue. And so, but because maybe this person is a loyal party member, and so you get an assessment from tax authority, so you are going to call the governor and say, can you imagine what the chairman of IRS is doing? This guy must be removed. The governor must not listen to that. You understand? And you should ask the person and say, oh, did they overcharge you? How much did they say is your income? You cannot donate to political parties 100 million, 1 billion, 2 billion, and you are bringing tax, and your revenue for the year is reading 20 million, 10 million. We're going to ask you a question. You have donated this much, because I see a lot of things on television. You see somebody come, hold microphone, I'm donating 2 billion. I am donating 1 billion. I'm going to ask you as tax authority, excuse me, can I see your tax clearance? Well, the last 10 years.
So you're
how
saying
much
that,
is your income?
So you say we should be bringing that to the political rallies?
Yeah, no, we are going to pursue everybody. Everybody. Okay. Otherwise, the country will not move forward. Okay. Otherwise, what we think we are going to achieve by making this law to be pro-poor and ensuring that, you see the president, he had a statement, let the poor breed, right? And then let's tax wealth. Now, if the wealth we want to tax, and that's the main reason we say these people are exempted, 0 rate at certain point, and then they are the one not wanting to pay, then we are back to square zero. Then the law becomes useless. If you cannot implement the law because some people act like they are bigger than the law, then you are in trouble. So we need people who have character to be chairmen of state internal revenue services, because the bulk of this matter we are talking, individual taxes, reside with the state, where the governor can just call the chairman of the internal revenue and say, please withdraw that assessment. that person should just resign and say, I'm sorry, I cannot continue to be chairman.
Okay.
If this is what we're going to do.
Okay, let me ask you this, Mr. Lani. Part of the recommendations of the law talks about a tax ombudsman. And so the question then arises, what role would the tax ombudsman be playing, particularly in addressing public grievances and public trust and building public trust in the tax system? First of all, just to help people understand, I'm sure a number of people are hearing that for the first time. What kind of grievances are likely to arise?
Yeah, thank you. I think one of the first things to say to that is, if we look at the study that NESG made over a few years ago around tax perception and tax morale, is that Nigerians have a very poor morale when it comes to paying taxes, right? The second one is tax evasion is very rampant, and if you ask 1 out of every 5 Nigerians, right, they are okay with Nigerians not paying taxes, right? Because there is that notion that a Nigerian is a self-government, right? You provide your electricity, you provide your security, water, and things like that. So when it comes to the attitude to pay taxes in Nigeria, that is very, very, very poor. And one of the major factors that leads to that is the complex tax laws, right? So the tax laws are very complex. And also the tax administration having to deal with multiple tax administrators as well can be very complex. And with the multiple audits engagements, right, that can be overwhelming for taxpayers, particularly small businesses that are just trying to grow, right? And where they're swimming against the tides, where 1 in every 5 businesses fail over 5 years. So taxes should not actually have to be a burden on businesses. And one of the key roles that the tax ombuds will play, right, is support, particularly small businesses or individuals that don't have the wherewithal to actually address their compliance or any disputes they have, not only with the Nigerian Revenue Service or the state tax authorities, but also with customs, right? And this is something that happens all over the world. It's a global feature, right? We have it in South Africa. It started from Sweden, right? And it's something that is a step forward from a Nigerian tax landscape where we have a body now. Now, from an implementation standpoint, to ensure that it's quite effective, it's very important that the governance structure of the tax ombud is one that has the capacity to stand for what is right. Right, so usually what will come before the tax ombuds are disputes where there is differences in opinions between the taxpayer and the tax authority. Right, so the tax ombud should have a governance process that is independent, right, and has the capacity to declare what is right in that particular scenario. So that means they need the governance, they need the capacity, so they need to be filled with people that have the knowledge of taxation of the system to be able to command the ability of taxpayers to come to them. And one big aspect of that will be transparency as well, right? We see what happens in South Africa. The tax ombuds actually declares annual reports, right? How much disputes came to it, how much was settled in favor of the taxpayer, how much was settled in the case of the tax authorities. Right, and one of the issues that we see from South Africa that we need to address from an implementation standpoint, right, and this is anchoring on the independence, is the funding of the body, right, to ensure that the funding of the tax ombuds, right, is disconnected from the tax authorities where it gets its own, maybe directly from the Nigerian budget, right, to ensure that it can actually deliver decisions independently and in a way that promotes a just and equitable tax system.
Is it impossible for sustainability purposes? Is it impossible for the same tax ombudsman you're talking about here now to be funded through the tax system itself?
Yes, it is. It is possible, right? We just need to ensure that it has direct access. You know what's happening in the federal system.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
They take the team, right?
Injustice is
so we don't want that.
Okay. The question I have for you, Dr. Adeyo, is this, and this one is from Charles Jabo. Also begs the question around, some of the issues that we have spoken about before. How has this new tax act taken care of the various local government taxes, the touts blocking pickup vans, trucks, and buses across the country?
Yes.
Because it's in the light of the same tax ombudsman stuff.
So, in fact, I think the work of the tax ombudsman should be made easy by state government and local government sitting together. And that's why I said implementation should start now by ensuring that all the nuisance bylaws at local government level, state laws that is aimed at collecting taxes that are not in the act should be repealed. And then we should educate the people with billboards. These people, if they come to you, don't answer them, we do not authorize them. But you can see that most of these guys on the road you see, they've helped the governor during campaign. It's food for the boys and so on. But I believe Nigerians are good people, and I believe that the main problem we need to address is tax justice. Because I remember between 2010 and 2013, when I was doing my PhD research, we found out that people want to pay tax in Africa, but the question they ask you, the one we've been paying before, what can they show for it? I was telling me about some part of the road to get to Channels when you cross from the express to come to the gate here. You know, you can't find such road in some part of the world, even in the village. You can't find them. We're talking about a farm in Scotland that all the roads that lead to those farms, tarred, right? It's not that I saw picture, I went there. So if you address tax justice, where people can see, you remember in the past where government is doing a project, they say taxpayers' money in action. But the taxpayers' money now is in action in the pockets of politicians.
And generating...
It's inside the private jets they are buying. It's inside. So if the taxpayers' money is not acting in providing infrastructure, then no matter how beautiful the tax law is, people will not comply. I can tell you that. Because you're going to challenge them. And don't forget, the tax authority have employees who are also living among us. Who knows that to drive from his house is a problem to the main road. And he's going to come to you, he's also facing very bad road. And he's going to ask you for tax. You're going to ask him, how did you get here? So, if you don't address tax justice, where we can see value for money, if I pay taxes, look, the water works that used to work when we were small. In our own compound in Abeokuta at Erunwo, tap flows everywhere. And if tap does not flow in your house, there is a public tap where you get water. Now, there is no public water flowing anywhere. Okay. So you have boreholes everywhere. So tax justice should be addressed. We should question them. The money you have collected, let's see transparency, accountability, and how you use the money. And that
will hopefully help people to pay more. But we'll take a short break now. But before then, just to quickly speak to this issue raised by Kunle Abiso. He says, I still want to ask about personal income tax. For example, if you earn like 280,000 naira monthly, are you still going to be exempted?
No, you are not going to be exempted. Because 280,000 naira monthly is less than 300,000. Okay. So if you earn 300,000, you have 3.6 million in a year. So when you are granted consolidated allowance, what you are going to have left is small. It's going to be in the range of that 2.2, which is the first threshold of 15%. And so very minimal as well in a year.
Okay. We'll take a short break now. When we return, some of these conversations, well, some final questions will be asked on the program. To stay with us. Thank you so much for remaining with us. We still have two gentlemen joining us for this conversation on a focus on Nigeria's tax overhaul. Dr. Olugbengadu is a chartered accountant as well as public affairs analyst, as well as Mr. Babatunde Olani, Associate Director at PwC Nigeria. Well, you're talking about this tax justice thing, Dr. Ade, before we took the break. And you spoke about state governments. You see, this tax justice thing, people need to know that they can appeal I saw part of the recommendation is tax appeal. Speak to us a little about that one. What is it that people need to know, whether they are small businesses or big businesses and all of those things, and how will their investments be protected? Because sometimes you said something the other time about state governments, and when we talk about state governments, it's just one or two persons representing the state, simply because they have the power of the state, they will be able to do a thing or two. So how do people exploit or explore the option of the tax appeal in a way that they are still protected afterwards?
Okay, so just like Nii was talking about the caliber of people that should be in the tax appeal and the ombudsman, you need to choose people of integrity who will not, because you've been appointed by government and then a taxpayer has come to you to say, oh, I have this problem with this tax authority, and then you dance to the tune of the government. Basically, the tax appeal actually is pro-people and pro-business, to make sure that you are not cheated, to make sure that you are not over-assessed to pay taxes. And then, again, part of the issue we talk about tax justice is that there's a new system that if you have a factory sited in a given location and you need to do roads leading to that location, these roads that you have done is going to be a tax credit for you. So you can now present it to FIRS. They look at it and say, okay, this road is going to cost maybe 3 billion, for example, or 1 billion. You are able to do, because if you don't do it, your customer will not be able to assess you. You have difficulty in receiving your materials and then taking them out. Now, it is the responsibility of government to provide those infrastructure in the first place. Now, it's not been done, and then you're now doing it. So, Dangote is doing a lot on this. You see Dangote doing concrete roads. It's tax credit system. So, when you do that, and then you're going to have issues on, oh, the cost of this road is not 1 billion. It's supposed to be 300 million, you know? And so
Are you the one that spent the money for me?
So you now have issues. So what we need to do, if you look at the BOQ of government contract, it's probably times 10 in private sector. So you cannot then do the same road, the same topography, the same distance at 1.5 billion. And as a private sector person, I did it for 1 billion, and you still want to query my tax credit figure. So this is where the tax appeal, they come in. And so if you see anything that is wrong and you want to do, you can apply. And then I fix this road, this is the cost. So if at the end of the day, we calculate your tax is, say, 1.1 billion, and you have done road of 1 billion, you will pay only 100 million. Now you have the road, you are happy, your customers are happy, ease of doing business is assured. What that implies is that the things that government did not do for you, you have decided to take your destiny in your hands. And this is peaceful. And that's why I want to commend the Federal Inland Revenue Services for this kind of program. And it is actually from the principle of tax justice.
Okay. Now, Mr. Olani, how can government, how can they ensure that the additional revenue generated from these reforms directly benefits the people?
I think it is anchored on tax justice, right, and also the social contract, right?
Well, what he's talking about is the private sector now being the one to take the lead in that regard. But this time around, is there a way for government itself to ensure that the tax is utilized? Otherwise, does that responsibility have to be for civil society organizations or individuals themselves in the communities?
So it's two-pronged. So the first one is the Presidential Committee actually had two responsibilities. One is on fiscal policy, right, and the second is on tax reforms. Now, there's a lot of work that has been done on the fiscal policy side, which is pretty much focusing on how best does government utilize revenue in terms of spending, and also in terms of borrowing as well. Taiwo had said in one of his interviews that it focused on subsidies, for example, how best does government utilize subsidies to ease the burdens of Nigeria and promote investment in certain sectors. It also focuses on things around borrowing, how best to tie borrowed capital, right, to infrastructure projects, which the government has done really well with the Sukuk bond and the green bonds that have been raised so far, and also the RITC tax credit program, right? But one of the things that is very important is accountability, right? And there is that notion of chicken and egg. Do we pay first and hold government accountable, or does government utilize revenues they're getting today judiciously to entice people to pay more taxes? But we'll say that the more people pay, right, the more we hold government accountable, right? All at the federal and also at the state levels. And the other part is also hinging on the tiers of government, right? Which is the role of the Legislative House, the National Assembly, right? In terms of their oversight functions in ensuring that the executors of these tax laws, in terms of the tax authorities, in terms of customs, in terms of NUPRC, NMDPRA, and all these other government bodies that are looking to implement certain aspects of the laws, that they do that judiciously, right, and help us achieve the objective around that.
You said something instructive the other time, Dr. Adeye, about states having collaborative conversations and all of those. And you said that they're still going to go to the National Assembly to go and ask for more and all of that. What conversations, particularly people-centered conversations, should members of the Nigeria Governors Forum be having among themselves now? When they sit down to have peer reviews, what kind of conversations should they be asking? Something instructive you said, Dr. Adeye, about people seeing tax work. A good number of times, so many people have made references to the Fashola days in Lagos, where they would be fixing roads and they will write taxpayers' money in action. So what kind of conversations should state governments be having among themselves to ensure that they can practically buy the trust
of the people? Okay, I'll refer to a research conducted by myself and two professors, Professor Rufus Akintoye and then Professor Patrick Enye. We conducted a research during my PhD program, and we came up with what we call tax generation and revenue utilization policy. So, if you can deal with that, when Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister of England, the United Kingdom, there is what we call hypothecated taxes in the UK. I came across that when I was doing my postgraduate in law, is that apart from tax generation policy, you must also have that revenue utilization policy side by side. And I'll give you an example. If you are looking at aviation industry, you then have to look at it. How much is Emirates giving us? How much is Virgin giving us? How much are we getting? And then we say, okay, if the total money we got from this Murtala Mohammed Airport is 100 billion, and they are having problem about parking system, taxi system, we must take a portion to them. You remember the gridlock at Apapa? The fear of Apapa is the beginning of wisdom. Many years ago, I'll be at Liverpool going to Tinkan for hours. It was a terrible place. But look at what has happened. And then you look at the revenue that custom is generating into the purse of the federal government. So the governors need to sit down within themselves and say, hey, the industrial hub that you have in your respective states, you need to put a chunk of the revenue that you have generated into those places. So you don't just say, we decide what to do with the money. No, you cannot just decide anyhow. You decide to apportion that revenue in terms of utilization to the places where you have received them. If you have children that follows you to go to the farm, one goes with you to the farm from 7 a.m. and comes back at 6 p.m., if you understand farming very well. Once the light is off, we leave the farm. Now, you now have a child that goes with you to the farm and leaves the farm at 11. And then you come back. You want to give them reward. So you're now giving them the same thing. Abba, it's not possible. So they need to have this conversation.
Okay.
And then making sure that their state is secured. Don't envy Lagos. You do something that Lagos has done.
Okay.
Don't envy Ogun State. Do what Ogun State has done.
Okay.
Create an enabling environment. If people want to collect CFO in your state, and it's going to take them 2-3 years. It took me 11 years to get a particular governor's consent.
Wow.
11 years. And that's not good for business.
Absolutely.
Because you are going to use the collateral to get credit facilities.
I will try not to mention this fellow's name, Mr. Lani, so that his employer doesn't give you a problem. But he's asking, how can I work out my tax? I'm earning 274,800. Is there a way for them to work out their tax?
Yes, there is a way, right? And based on the law, so that's 274 annually. That would be roughly around 3.2 that the previous commentator also asked as well, right? And as we reckoned, above, should I say, 2.2 million, right? You tend to pay the first level of.
Okay, so he has to calculate the annual.
Wow, right? So
then, what's the percentage of the annual?
So the first 800 is zero. Okay. Then at 2.2 million, I think that is around 11%.
Okay.
Right. Then that's pretty much what is utilized at that level. Okay. It's not going to be materially above the next band.
Okay.
Right. So one of the things that is also important is the relief around rent, right? And that's supposed to support government with collecting data around property. So you have to submit the details of your landlord.
Oh.
Right, for you when you're filing your income tax return. So first you have to file income tax returns, right, as an individual. Then you provide the details of your landlord. Then you are entitled to the annual 200,000 naira or 20% of your annual income, whichever is lower, right, as a relief in computing your tax. But effectively, one important thing is that if you're earning in that range, your effective tax rate will reduce compared to what you are paying right before this tax law came into being.
Another quick one. Can employees approach the tax ombudsman around payee?
So to a large extent, the employer, right, is responsible to account for the income tax for its employees through the payee system. Right, so what that means is that the tax authorities would go directly to the employer for the taxes that are accountable for the employee. So if there are any situation where the employees feel aggrieved as to the taxes that they are paying, the first point of call is the employer. Right now, to the extent that the employer cannot push those arguments through with the tax authorities when they come for audit, right, then the employer can then go to the tax ombuds for support.
Well, this conversation, I said that what I said, the first thing that I said before we started this program is you will have to yourself go read up on these things, because the benefits that you have that you are not aware of is money missing. It's like you have a lot of money in the bank account and you're still with a pan beside the road, begging for money. Gentlemen, I have to thank you very much this morning for being on this program and for putting us through all of this, because it's all fun. For as long as, people know what's happening. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Dr. Olugbenga is a chartered accountant and public affairs analyst, as well as Mr. Babatunde Olani, who is an associate director with PwC Nigeria. We appreciate your time today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
You can be a part of the next conversation as well. As I had been saying, we are having conversations with, as to that meme, 60-year-old man. That's coming up after this conversation. Just stay with us.